Batman Begins was arguably the greatest Batman origin movie that you could ever ask for. However, it was by no means the first attempt to tell Batman's origin story on the big screen. In fact, only a couple years before Batman Begins came out, Warner Brothers initially hired Darren Aronofsky, the man behind Requiem for a Dream, and Frank Miller, the man behind the Batman Year One comic book, to do a film version of that comic. So, what if it had happened? What if somehow Warner Brothers liked the script and Aronofsky's vision had actually been brought to life? Simply put, what if Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One was made? So somehow, Darren Aronofsky directs Batman Year One in the early 2000s. So what kind of a movie was it going to be? Well, basically, it was going to be somewhat like the Joker movie that we got with Joaquin Phoenix, in that it was going to be heavily inspired in tone by movies like Taxi Driver, and it was going to have a very, very gritty detective crime noir feel. The movie was actually going to take place in the red light district of Gotham City, and we would have explored the real criminal element. This was going to be a very hard R-rated film. Now, for casting choices, Joaquin Phoenix, ironically enough, was rumored for the titular role of Batman, while Aaron Eckhart was also supposedly attached to the film, possibly playing a much younger version of Commissioner Gordon. So now, as for the story, it was going to be focusing on a very different version of the Batman origin. In this version, Bruce was not going to be trained by the League of Shadows. In fact, he wasn't even going to be rich. In this version, he actually gets taken in after his parents die by a father and son named Big Al and Little Al, who run an auto mechanic shop. So Bruce actually grows up to become an auto mechanic himself, and he's far from rich. In fact, he actually decides deliberately not to inherit his family fortune, because he's obsessed with learning the mindset of criminals. So he decides that, just like in Batman Begins where he became a criminal, this time though he wants to stay with the criminals. He wants to live with the criminals in the shittiest part of Gotham in order to get a real feel for the chaos of the city. So now he fills his room with various TVs, police scanners, and newspaper clippings, and he's also dealing with regular nightmares of his parents' murders. He's also friends with and possibly attracted to Selina Kyle, who is forced to become a prostitute by a local pimp who pays off the police to get away with his crimes. Now, this romance is actually a bit reminiscent of the one that they did with Mickey Rourke and Marissa Tomei in The Wrestler. So I do think that Darren Aronofsky repurposed his idea for Batman Year One for The Wrestler. So I imagine that their chemistry would be somewhat like that. Now, this movie also would have explored Selina's eventual transformation into Catwoman as she begins stealing jewelry in hopes of leaving her life as a prostitute behind, and she might possibly become a little bit obsessed with stealing. Now, meanwhile, Jim Gordon is actually really struggling with depression due to the corruption in the police force, as well as his inability to support his family in these troubling times. His first scene in the movie actually sees him nearly killing himself with his pistol. Now, while all this is going on, the police are actually beginning to turn on Gordon because he's not taking bribes, he refuses. And so they even eventually gang up on him and beat him to an absolute fucking pulp. So throughout the movie, Bruce Wayne's really dealing with this feeling he has. He wants to be able to do something about the crime, but he doesn't really know how to do it. He's taught himself how to fight, but doesn't know how to put it to good use. But in the end, he's finally inspired to become a vigilante when Jim Gordon gives a very inspiring speech about his war on crime. His one-man war on crime, really, because all the other police are corrupt. So Bruce takes to making himself various homemade armor suits that he actually struggles with because they don't always fit, and some aspects of the suit make him less maneuverable and more vulnerable. So yeah, this is a Batman who regularly makes errors, which he has to learn from. And in the end, he finally becomes inspired to take up the proper Batman mantle because, weirdly enough, of his father's ring. You see, the ring has the initials TW on it for Thomas Wayne, and when he punches people in the face with it, it actually leaves an imprint that looks a little bit like a bat. So he earns the nickname of Batman on the news. So now another interesting thing actually this movie was going to explore is Bruce's ability to actually blend in with civilians. And he actually uses that to his advantage. He actually baits criminals by pretending to be a lost tourist. So that way he can draw out the criminals, like a criminal magnet, if you will. Now, by movie's end, he actually completes his transformation into Batman, and he takes down the corrupt police commissioner after he tries to send every cop in Gotham City to kill the Batman. So yeah, in this movie, seemingly the police commissioner was actually going to be the main villain instead of one of your typical iconic Batman villains, which I think would have been kind of interesting. And ultimately, in the end, Batman is of course able to rid the police of its corruption, and he actually ends the movie by finally reclaiming his family fortune and moving into Wayne Manor to become the more traditional version of Batman for the sequels. And that is what Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One was going to be like. So what do I think of this movie? I think it sounds alright. Like, there are aspects of it I think are a bit much. Okay, Frank Miller himself has said in interviews that he thought this movie sounded too dark. And I have to agree, I think it does sound almost dark to a fault. Like, comedically dark, almost. Like, I don't know. Like, I kind of like the idea of Jim Gordon being suicidal, but for that to be his first scene, like, I don't know. I feel like that's almost a bit much. Like, it's almost like, it almost makes you not want to watch it. You know what I mean? Because it's just so dark. I mean, I'm sure that for other people, that's not going to be the case, and I probably wouldn't be that bothered by it personally, but I can imagine other people being very, very bothered by that. And Bruce Wayne being poor, I actually think is an alright decision, because I do understand that some people find Bruce Wayne hard to relate to because he's rich, and most people in the world are not rich. So a lot of people have a harder time latching onto Bruce Wayne as opposed to Batman because they can't relate to a rich person. And so for that reason, maybe making him poor would have been good. Ultimately, though, it honestly, I don't think they need to make him poor. Like, I think they could have done the whole, him scoping out the red light district thing without him actually living there. Like, I think they could have just had him do what they do in the comics, which is just to put on disguises and investigate that way, which is what it looks like they're going to be doing in Robert Pattinson's Batman movie. So I'm excited to see that aspect of the Batman character in that. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix is a chameleon. Like, that man can do absolutely anything. Because, like, I know some people are going to say, oh, he couldn't play Batman because he looks too weird, or, or whatever they want to say. But honestly, he has played plenty of good guys before. He's played plenty of sympathetic characters in movies before. Characters that have to deal with a lot of tragedy. And not just the Joker, but, like, also Johnny Cash and Walk the Line, or, like in Signs. He's had to play characters that have to deal with a lot of things. And, he's really good at making you feel sympathetic for him in movies like Her as well. So, ultimately, I do think Joaquin Phoenix could have made a pretty good Batman. I don't think his Batman would have been as good as his Joker, I admit. I think he was ultimately born to play the Joker. But if they wanted him to play Batman, I think he would have done a fantastic job with the right direction. Selena Kyle being a prostitute. I don't know about that. I like what he's trying to do, but it does seem as I said, it does seem a little too dark, even for a Batman movie. And as I said, he would end up repurposing that idea basically in The Wrestler, and I think it worked in The Wrestler, but The Wrestler is a very different movie than Batman. And speaking of his other movies, I would have been interested to see his nightmare sequences, because I imagine they would have had a lot of wings and bat-like imagery, constantly haunting him. And I imagine he could have done some really cool visual effects with that, like he would do with the Black Wings and Black Swan. Like, I kept thinking of Black Swan when I was thinking of Darren Aronofsky's Batman nightmare sequences, and I think that would have been really damn cool. And as for a younger Jim Gordon that's more around Batman's age, I think that's not a bad idea either. Like, I'm not saying Jim Gordon shouldn't be old, because I do think Jim Gordon works better as a character when he's old, but I do think him being young would have been interesting to explore. A more youthful Gordon that's more around Batman's age and can actually help him out a bit more in the field. And Darren Aronofsky has said that his Batman was not going to be a team player, so it would have been really interesting to see those two interact with each other. And it would have also been interesting to see if they were going to give him a Robin in one of the sequels. I think that would have been really interesting to see unfold as well. So ultimately, do I think this movie should have been made? Honestly, no. Like, as I said, I think elements of this work, and maybe it all would have come together. Darren Aronofsky, sorry, has made a lot more good movies than bad. And even his bad movies, I think, are still an experience. But ultimately, as I said, I do think this movie is a little too dark for comfort. And Warner Brothers clearly agree, because that's one of the main reasons they ultimately decided not to do this one. And as I've said before, I think Batman Begins is just about as perfect as a Batman origin as you can do. So ultimately, in the end, I'm definitely glad we got the Dark Knight trilogy instead. But I am interested in this still. Like, I think honestly, they should do an animated version of this. Like people have said in the past that they could do an animated version of Superman Lives, and I thought that would be a really cool idea. And I also think they could do an animated version of this, like with Darren Aronofsky directing. It would be interesting because Darren Aronofsky, as far as I know, has never done anything animated. So that's just an idea. That way you're not screwing with, Robert Pattinson or Ben Affleck or Michael Keaton or whoever the hell is going to be the next Batman from this point on, honestly. You're not screwing with any of them. You can just do this to show people if it would have worked. I think that would have been really cool. But, especially because Warner Brothers is definitely more open to doing R-rated movies after Joker became the highest grossing R-rated movie ever made. So, yeah. Ultimately, I do think that this movie, it could have worked, but in the end, I'm kind of glad it didn't get made because, again, the Dark Knight trilogy was so amazing, and honestly, I don't think that this sounds better than Batman Begins. So ultimately, it's an interesting curiosity, but I'm ultimately glad it didn't get made. Hopefully, it gets made in an animated form, though. That would be cool. Now, anyway, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and make sure to give me more what-if recommendations in the comments down below. Let me know if you think this movie would have been good, and share this video with all of your friends on all your various social media platforms, and I'll see you everybody in the next video.